Aliens thought Earth had no defense. Then hundreds of human ships appeared. The scout ship Vral's Eye moved quietly through the dark, far past the orbit of the last planet in the system. Its hull was black and smooth, built to slip past sensors like a shadow slipping past a candle. Inside, Captain Zeth Kor leaned over his console and stared at the small blue world on the screen in front of him. It looked so calm, so quiet, so weak. Zeth had seen many worlds in his long service to the Zoth Dominion. He had seen worlds ringed with armed stations, worlds hidden behind shields of energy, worlds that fired on his ship before he even finished his first scan. This world was not like those. This world, called Earth by its own people, had almost nothing. A few dozen satellites drifted around it, most of them old and slow, doing nothing more than watching weather or beaming signals for communication. There were no warships. There were no orbital cannons. There were no drone screens or minefields or any of the things a smart species would build to protect its home. "Report," said the ship's second officer, a thin alien named Vesk, from the seat beside him. "No defenses," Zeth said. "No fleet. No orbital weapons. Just rocks with metal boxes on them, watching the sky like children." Vesk made a low sound, something like a laugh. "Then this will be an easy claim." Zeth nodded slowly. He had orders to observe only, not to attack. Not yet. The Dominion liked to be careful before it moved into a new system, because careful conquest cost fewer lives and fewer ships. But looking at this small, blue, undefended world, Zeth felt there was little to be careful about. This was not a fight. This was a formality. He recorded his findings, added images of the planet, its moon, and the handful of old satellites, and sent the report back through the long chain of relay beacons that connected this far corner of space to the heart of the Dominion. Then he turned the Vral's Eye around and left the system, the way a wolf leaves after checking that a sheep pen has no dogs. Far away, on a world called Kaltoth Prime, in a hall built from black stone and lit by cold white light, High Marshal Draith stood before a wall of screens, showing the report from the scout ship. Around him stood a dozen officers, all silent, all waiting for his judgment. Draith was old, even by the long lifespan of his people. He had commanded fleets in 3 wars and had conquered 11 worlds in his career. His face carried old scars from a battle centuries past, scars that never fully healed because the medicine of his youth had not been as advanced as it was now. He looked at the images of Earth for a long moment, his clawed hand resting on the edge of the console. "No defenses at all," he said, more to himself than to the room. "None, High Marshal," said an officer near the back. "The scout confirms it. A single scattered species, not yet capable of interstellar travel. Weak technology. No weapons in orbit. No fleet of any kind." Draith allowed himself something close to a smile. In his long life, he had learned that easy conquests were rare gifts, and this looked like the easiest one he had ever been offered. Earth had resources the Dominion wanted, water in great amounts, rich minerals in its crust, and a position in space that would let the Dominion push further into this side of the galaxy. All of that, sitting unguarded, waiting to be taken. "Prepare the invasion fleet," Draith said. "Full strength. I want no mistakes, even against an enemy with no teeth. We will take this world quickly, before any other power notices it and tries to claim it first." The officers bowed and moved to their tasks. Word spread through the Dominion's shipyards, and soon hundreds of workers were loading warships with fuel and weapons, preparing for a journey across the stars to a small world that, as far as the Dominion knew, could not fight back. On Earth, life went on as it always had. In a city called Denver, in the middle of a country called the United States, a woman named Sarah Chen sat in a quiet office late at night, looking over reports on a screen. She was 44 years old, with short dark hair and tired eyes, and she wore the uniform of a fleet she was not allowed to speak about to anyone outside a very small circle. 30 years ago, when Sarah was a teenager, something had happened that most people on Earth still did not know about. A small research station near Mars, built to study asteroids, had gone silent one night. When a rescue ship arrived days later, it found the station destroyed, its walls torn open, as if by claws made of pure energy. Among the wreckage, engineers found something that did not belong to any human machine. A piece of metal, strange and cold, covered in markings no one recognized. That piece of metal changed everything. The governments of Earth, usually slow to agree on anything, came together in secret within weeks. They understood, all at once, that humanity was not alone, and that whoever, or whatever, had destroyed that station might return one day with more than a single strike. So they built something new. Not a space agency for cameras and press conferences, but a hidden program, buried under normal budgets and covered up by ordinary-sounding names. They called it Project Aegis. For 30 years, Aegis had grown in the dark, deep in the asteroid belt, on the far side of the moon, and around the icy moons of Jupiter. Humans built shipyards that no telescope on Earth or satellite in the sky ever saw. They studied the strange metal from Mars, learned its secrets slowly, mixed it with human ideas about engines, weapons, and shields. It took 10 years just to understand how the metal worked. It took another 10 to build the first working ship from what they learned. And in the last 10 years, humanity had built an entire fleet, hidden, silent, and growing every year. Sarah Chen had joined Aegis at 25, fresh out of the Navy, chosen for her sharp mind and her ability to stay calm under pressure. Now, after 19 years of service, she was Admiral Chen, in command of the Seoul Defense Fleet, a fleet that no ordinary citizen of Earth had ever seen, hidden behind a story about mining operations and deep space research. Her screen chimed. A message had come in from the Deep Space Watch Station near Neptune, the outermost eye of Project Aegis. She opened it and read the first line, and her tired eyes snapped fully awake. Unknown scout vessel detected. Confirmed non-human design. Departed system after passive scan. No hostile action taken. Sarah read it 3 times before she picked up her communicator and called her second-in-command, a sharp young officer named Mateo Reyes. "Mateo," she said, "get to the command center. We might have just been found." Mateo Reyes arrived within 20 minutes, his uniform half-buttoned, his hair still messy from being woken up. He was 31, quick-thinking, and had grown up hearing stories about the Mars incident from his grandmother, who had worked as one of the first engineers on the recovered alien metal. He had joined Aegis because of those stories, wanting to be part of the answer to a question that had haunted humanity in secret for decades. What happens when they come back? "Tell me everything," Mateo said, sliding into a chair beside Sarah. She showed him the data from Neptune Station. A ship, fast and quiet, had passed close enough for the hidden sensors to catch a partial reading before it vanished. Its shape did not match anything human. Its engine signature was unlike any drive system Earth had built, though it shared some traits with the pieces recovered from the Mars wreckage all those years ago. "It didn't attack," Mateo said, reading the report. "No," Sarah agreed. "It was a scout. It looked, and it left. That means whoever sent it is deciding something right now. Maybe deciding if we're worth attacking. Maybe deciding how many ships to send." Mateo felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. For years, Project Aegis had trained for this exact moment, running drills, building ships, preparing pilots, and yet now that it might actually be happening, it felt different from any drill. This was real. "What do we do?" he asked. Sarah looked at the star map on the far wall, a slowly turning model of the solar system with small dots marking every hidden shipyard, every secret base, every ship currently in service. There were more dots than most people would ever guess. Project Aegis had grown far larger than anyone outside the program understood. "We wake up the fleet," she said. "All of it. If they come, we will not be standing here with nothing, the way that station near Mars was 30 years ago. We will be ready." She reached over and pressed a small red switch on her console, one that had never been pressed before in the history of the program. Across the solar system, in shipyards hidden in the shadows of asteroids and behind the cold curve of distant moons, alarms began to sound. Engineers and pilots who had trained for years without ever expecting a real call to arms suddenly found themselves running through checklists that had, until this night, only ever been practice. Weeks passed. On Kaltoth Prime, the Zoth Dominion finished preparing its invasion fleet. Hundreds of warships gathered in orbit, their engines glowing, their weapons loaded, their crews ready for what everyone believed would be a short and simple mission. High Marshal Draith stood on the deck of his flagship, the Vor Ashan Kar, and watched as the fleet formed into its travel pattern, ready to jump toward the small, undefended world called Earth. "Send word to the other commanders," Draith said. "We leave within the hour." By the time anyone else in the galaxy notices this system, Earth will already belong to the Dominion. Across the vast dark of space, unaware of each other's full plans, two fleets prepared to meet. One believed it was walking into an empty house. The other had spent 30 years building walls that no one outside had ever seen. Neither side yet knew how wrong, or how right, their assumptions would prove to be. In the shipyards of Aegis, Sarah Chen stood in front of a gathering of pilots and officers, all of them standing straight, all of them waiting for her words. Behind her, through the wide viewing window of the command station, hundreds of human warships floated in formation, their hulls catching the distant light of the sun, engines humming softly as they waited for the order that would send them into the greatest test humanity had ever faced. "For 30 years, Sarah said, her voice steady, despite the weight in her chest, "we have built in silence, trained in silence, and waited in silence. We did not know when this day would come, but we knew it might come. And now, it seems, it has." She paused, looking out at the rows of ships beyond the glass, more warships than most of humanity even knew existed. "They think we have no defense," she said. "Let us show them how wrong they are." 3 days before that speech, in a lab buried deep inside a hollowed-out asteroid called Haven Rock, a scientist named Dr. Amara Singh had been the one to confirm that the pieces recovered from Mars, all those years ago, could still teach humanity something new. Amara had spent 20 years of her life studying that strange metal, first as a young researcher fresh out of university, and now as the head of all engineering research for Project Aegis. She remembered the day, as a graduate student, when she had first been called into a locked room and shown a photograph of the twisted wreckage from the Mars station. She remembered how her hands had shaken when she held a small sample of the alien metal for the first time, cold and smooth, humming faintly, with an energy that no instrument at the time could measure. It had taken years of careful, quiet work that could never be spoken about at conferences or written about in public papers, before humanity understood even a fraction of what that metal could do. The breakthrough came slowly. First, humans learned that the metal could bend the pull of gravity around itself if given the right amount of energy. Later, they learned it could be shaped into engines that pushed a ship forward without needing to burn fuel in the old way, engines far faster and far quieter than anything built before. Then came shields, thin fields of bent light and force that could stop most weapons humanity had ever built, and eventually, weapons of their own, drawing on the same strange power. By the time Amara turned 40, the first true warship built with this technology, named the Horizon, had been completed in secret, floating silently in the shadow of one of Jupiter's smaller moons. It was small compared to what would come later, barely large enough to hold a crew of 30, but it worked. It flew faster than anything humanity had built before. Its shields held against test weapons, and its engines ran without a single fault for 6 months straight. From the Horizon came a whole new class of ships, each one bigger and stronger than the last. The engineers gave them names from old human legends: Hammer, Anvil, Storm, Guardian, and built them in secret shipyards, hidden behind cover stories about asteroid mining companies and deep space research missions. Governments funneled money quietly into the program through budgets meant for other things, and workers who joined Aegis signed papers promising never to speak a word of what they built, not even to their own families. Amara had watched the fleet grow from a single test ship to hundreds of warships, spread across secret bases throughout the solar system. She had grown old with the program, her black hair now streaked with gray, her hands slower than they used to be, but her mind as sharp as ever. When the alarm rang through Haven Rock that night, calling all engineers to their stations, she had felt a strange mix of fear and something close to pride. 30 years of secret work was finally about to be tested. "Dr. Singh," said a young technician, running into her office with a data pad in his hand. "Command wants a full status report on fleet readiness. All ships, all systems." Amara took the pad and scanned through the numbers quickly. Engines, ready. Shields, ready. Weapons, ready. Crews, mostly trained, though a few of the newest ships still had crews with less than a year of experience. It would have to be enough. "Tell them," she said, "that the fleet is as ready as 30 years of work can make it." Across the solar system, word of the alarm spread through every hidden base. On the far side of the moon, in a shipyard built into a deep crater that no telescope from Earth could see into, young pilots ran to their ships, pulling on flight suits, checking weapons systems, saying quick goodbyes to friends, before climbing into cockpits they had trained in for years, but never expected to use for a real battle. One of these pilots was a young woman named Priya Nair, only 26 years old, who had joined Aegis 5 years earlier straight out of flight school. She had grown up in Mumbai, the daughter of 2 doctors, and had always dreamed of flying, though she had imagined flying passenger planes, not warships built from alien metal. When she was picked for Aegis, she had been sworn to secrecy so strict that she had not even been able to tell her parents where she worked. They believed she flew cargo drones for a mining company on contract with the government. Now, sitting in the cockpit of her ship, a sleek fighter called the Falcon 9, Priya ran through her checklist with hands that trembled only slightly. Around her, dozens of other fighters were doing the same, engines warming, lights blinking green across control panels. Through her cockpit window, she could see the much larger shapes of the capital ships gathering beyond the shipyard, hundreds of them, more than she had ever seen assembled in one place even during the largest training exercises. "This is really happening," she whispered to herself. Her comm crackled. "Falcon 9, this is flight control. Report status." "Falcon 9 ready," Priya said, forcing her voice to sound steady. "Standing by for orders." Across the fleet, thousands of voices like hers echoed the same words, pilots and crews confirming readiness, one ship at a time, until the entire Sol defense fleet stood prepared, waiting in the dark, silent and hidden, exactly as it had been built to be. Back on Kaltoth Prime, High Marshal Draith walked the halls of his flagship one final time before departure, inspecting his officers, checking reports, making sure every detail of the coming invasion was in order. He had fought in 3 wars, and had never lost a fleet under his direct command. He did not intend to lose this one either, even though he expected almost no resistance at all. "Remember," he told his officers as they gathered for a final briefing, "we are not going to fight a war. We are going to take a resource. Keep enough of the planet's surface and population intact to be useful to the Dominion afterward. There is no need for excessive destruction against an enemy with no fleet, no orbital defenses, and no way to fight back." The officers nodded, confident in their High Marshal's judgment. None of them, not even Draith himself, could have imagined what waited for them at the edge of that quiet solar system. A fleet built in secret over 30 years, hidden from every scan, every scout, every careful search the Dominion had ever made. A fleet of hundreds of human ships, ready and waiting, exactly where the Dominion believed nothing could be. The invasion fleet began its long journey across the stars, engines glowing bright against the dark, moving steadily toward a world that thought it was helpless, and toward a species that had spent 30 years preparing for exactly this moment. Back in the Aegis Command Center, Sarah Chen sat alone for a moment after her speech, staring at the star map on the wall. Matteo found her there, a cup of coffee in each hand, and quietly placed one in front of her before sitting down. "You did good out there," he said. "The pilots needed to hear that from you." Sarah took the coffee but did not drink it right away. 30 years, Matteo. 30 years of budgets hidden inside other budgets, of engineers who could never tell their families what they built, of pilots who trained for a war they weren't sure would ever come. All of it was for this moment, and I still don't know if it will be enough. "It has to be," Matteo said simply. "It's what we've got." She managed a small, tired smile at that. He was right, in his own simple way. Whatever came next, humanity would not face it with empty hands, the way it had 30 years ago, when a lonely research station near Mars went silent in the dark. This time, there would be ships, hundreds of them, waiting. Outside the command center's viewing window, the fleet continued its final preparations, engines glowing softly, weapons systems humming with stored power, crews standing ready at their posts. Far beyond the edge of the solar system, though no one on Earth could yet see it, a much larger fleet was already moving toward them, confident, unafraid, and utterly unaware of what truly waited for them at the end of their journey. Sarah picked up her cup at last and took a long drink of the coffee, letting the warmth settle her nerves. Whatever happened next, she thought, humanity would meet it standing, not hiding, and for the first time in 30 years of secrecy, that thought gave her something close to peace. The countdown to first contact had already begun, unseen and unheard across the vast dark distance between two worlds, two fleets, and two very different ideas of what would happen when they finally met. The Zoth invasion fleet moved through open space, its hundreds of warships forming a wide, arrow-shaped pattern that stretched across a distance greater than the width of many moons. At the head of the formation flew the Vor Ashan Kar, the flagship of High Marshal Draith, its long black hull covered in weapon turrets and sensor arrays, built to project strength as much as to fight. Draith stood on the bridge, watching the star map slowly update as the fleet drew closer to the target system. Beside him stood his second-in-command, a sharp-eyed officer named Commander Ryzek, who had served under Draith for over 20 years and had learned to read his moods almost as well as his own. "How long until we reach the system, Commander?" Draith asked. 3 days at current speed, High Marshal, Ryzek answered. The Scout's data has been confirmed by 2 additional passive sweeps, no change in the target planet's defenses, still nothing detected in orbit beyond a handful of old satellites. Draith allowed a small, satisfied sound to escape his throat. "Good. Send the fleet into final formation once we reach the outer edge of the system. I want the capital ships in front, ready to establish control of orbit immediately upon arrival. The support ships can follow behind with the ground forces." "As you command," Ryzek said, already turning to relay the orders. Draith returned his attention to the star map, watching the small blue dot that represented Earth grow slowly closer with each passing hour. In his long career, he had led fleets against enemies who fought back with everything they had, enemies who filled space with weapons fire, and forced him to bleed for every world he claimed. This time would be different. This time, the only fighting would be against the planet's thin atmosphere as his ships descended to claim the ground below. He did not know that, at that very moment, hundreds of human warships were already moving into position, hidden behind the cold shadow of Jupiter's moons, waiting for the signal to strike. In the Aegis Command Center, Admiral Sarah Chen studied the tracking data with careful eyes. Deep space sensors, hidden along the edges of the solar system and disguised as simple communication relays, had picked up faint traces of the approaching Zoth fleet 3 days after the first scout had been detected. The data was not perfect, the enemy ships were far away and moving carefully, but it was enough to give humanity a picture of what was coming. "Confirmed count," said a young analyst named Chen Wei, reading from his screen. "At least 300 vessels, possibly more, hidden within the sensor's blind spots. Formation suggests a mix of large capital ships and smaller support vessels. Speed and course indicate they will reach the outer solar system within 3 days." Sarah nodded slowly, absorbing the number. 300 ships at least. It was a large fleet, larger than she had hoped the enemy would send for what they clearly believed would be an easy conquest. But it was not larger than the Sol defense fleet, not by a wide margin. 30 years of secret shipbuilding had given humanity more warships than most people would ever guess, spread across hidden bases from the asteroid belt to the icy moons of Jupiter. "Bring up the full fleet roster," she said. The star map on the wall shifted, showing every human warship currently active across the solar system. The numbers scrolled past. 412 combat vessels in total, ranging from small fighters like Priya Nair's Falcon 9 to massive capital ships nearly as large as anything the Zoth fleet carried. It was more than enough to match the incoming force, if humanity used its ships wisely. "We have the numbers," Mateo Reyes said from his seat nearby. "But numbers alone won't win this. They've had wars across the galaxy for who knows how long. We've had 30 years of training against simulations. We need every advantage we can get." Sarah agreed silently. She turned to the tactical officer standing at the far console, a calm, older woman named Colonel Reyes, no relation to Mateo, who had spent the last decade designing battle plans for exactly this kind of scenario. "Colonel, what's our plan?" Colonel Reyes brought up a new display, showing a wide region of space near Jupiter, marked with dozens of small symbols representing hidden fleet positions. "We do not meet them in open space where they can see our full numbers from a distance," she explained. "We let them come close enough that turning back becomes difficult, and then we reveal the fleet all at once, from multiple directions. If they believe there is no defense at all, The shock of seeing hundreds of ships appear around them at once should cause confusion in their command structure, at least for the first crucial minutes of battle. And after the shock wears off? Sarah asked. Then it becomes a real fight, Colonel Reyes admitted. But a real fight is exactly what we've been training for. A fight fought on our terms. In space we know. Using ships built from technology we understand better than they think we do. Sarah studied the plan for a long moment, then nodded. Send it to all fleet commanders. We gather at the designated point near Jupiter and wait. When they arrive, we show them exactly how wrong they were. 3 days passed slowly for everyone involved, though in very different ways. On the Zoth ships, confidence grew with each passing hour, officers relaxing as scans continued to show no sign of resistance ahead. Soldiers who had trained for ground combat spent their time preparing equipment for what they expected to be a quick and peaceful occupation, not a battle. On the human side, those 3 days were filled with tension and quiet preparation. Pilots like Priya Nair spent long hours running simulations one final time, going over tactics with their squadron leaders, checking and rechecking their ships. Engineers like Dr. Amara Singh moved from ship to ship, making last adjustments to shield systems and weapons, working with a focus that left little room for fear, even though fear sat quietly in the back of every mind. Priya sat in the small mess hall of her carrier ship, the Endeavour, picking at a plate of food she had little appetite for. Around her, other pilots from her squadron talked quietly, some trying to joke to ease the tension, others simply staring at their plates in silence. "You scared?" asked a pilot named Diego Alvarez, sitting across from her. He was a few years older than Priya, with a calm, steady manner that had made him one of the more respected pilots in their squadron. "A little," Priya admitted. "Mostly I keep thinking about my parents. They think I fly cargo runs for a mining company. If something happens to me out here, they'll never even know the truth." Diego was quiet for a moment. "My grandfather used to tell me stories about the old wars on Earth, before we ever knew aliens existed. He said the scariest part was never the fighting itself. It was the waiting before it started. Once the fighting begins, you're too busy to be scared. It's the waiting that gets you." Priya managed a small smile. "Thanks, I think." "Anytime," Diego said, returning the smile. Around them, similar conversations played out across dozens of ships, young pilots and experienced veterans alike, finding small ways to steady themselves before what everyone understood might be the most important battle in human history. A battle that almost no one outside a small circle even knew was coming. On the third day, sensors across the Sol defense fleet lit up with new readings. The Zoth invasion fleet had entered the outer edge of the solar system, moving steadily inward, still holding its wide, confident formation, still showing no sign of expecting any resistance at all. In the Aegis Command Center, Sarah Chen watched the readings with a calm she did not entirely feel inside. "All fleet commanders, report status," she said into her comm. One by one, commanders across the hidden fleet confirmed readiness. Ships near Jupiter's moons powered up their engines, ready to move at a moment's notice. Ships hidden along the far side of the moon adjusted their positions slightly, preparing for the coordinated strike that Colonel Reyes had planned. Every part of the plan depended on timing, on catching the Zoth fleet at the right moment, close enough that retreat would be difficult, but not so close that they would spot the human fleet moving into position too early. "They're entering the trap zone," Colonel Reyes reported, watching the star map closely. "Estimated 40 minutes until they reach optimal engagement range." Sarah took a slow breath. 40 minutes. 40 minutes until 30 years of secret work either proved itself or failed against an enemy far more experienced in war than humanity had ever been. "All ships," she said, her voice carrying across every channel of the fleet, steady despite the weight pressing on her chest. "Hold position. Wait for my signal. Let them come to us." Across the solar system, hundreds of human warships sat silent and hidden, engines idling low, weapons charged, crews watching their screens with held breath, waiting for the moment their existence would finally be revealed to an enemy who believed, with complete confidence, that Earth had no defense at all. On the bridge of the Vor Ashan car, High Marshal Draith watched the star map with growing satisfaction. The fleet had entered the system without incident, exactly as the scout reports had promised. No resistance, no warning signals. No sign that anyone on the small blue world ahead knew what was coming for them. "Continue toward the target planet," he ordered. "Prepare landing forces for deployment once we establish orbit." "As you command, High Marshal," Ryzek answered. The fleet moved onward, confident and unhurried, its hundreds of ships gliding through the dark toward a world that, as far as the Dominion knew, could offer no resistance at all, completely unaware that they were moving directly into the center of a trap 30 years in the making. Behind them, hidden in the shadows of distant moons, the Sol defense fleet waited for the signal that would change everything. The 40 minutes passed slower than any Sarah Chen had ever known. She stood at the center of the command room, watching the star map as small dots representing the Zoth fleet crept closer and closer to the invisible line that Colonel Reyes had marked as the engagement zone. Around her, officers spoke in quiet, controlled voices, relaying updates, checking systems, making sure that when the moment came, nothing would be left to chance. 30 seconds to optimal range, Colonel Reyes said. Sarah's hand hovered over the comm switch that would send the signal to every hidden ship in the fleet. She thought, briefly, of the 30 years that had led to this moment, the scientists who had studied a piece of alien metal without ever knowing if their work would matter, the engineers who had built ships in secret, never able to speak of their achievements, the pilots who trained for a war they were not certain would ever come. All of it rested on the next few seconds. 10 seconds, Colonel Reyes said. Sarah's eyes moved across the room, meeting Mateo's for just a moment. He gave her a small nod, steady and sure. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. "All ships," Sarah said, pressing the switch, her voice carrying clearly across every channel of the fleet. "Engage." On the bridge of the Vor Ashan car, alarms began to scream all at once. "High Marshal," a sensor officer shouted, his voice cracking with alarm. Multiple contacts. Hundreds of contacts, appearing from all directions. Shields dropping across the fleet. Unidentified vessels closing fast. Draeth spun toward the main view screen, his eyes widening as the star map filled, almost instantly, with hundreds of new symbols. Ships were emerging from behind the shadow of Jupiter's largest moons, rising up from positions along the asteroid belt, dropping their stealth fields all at once in a wave that spread across the entire system. Where a moment before there had been empty space, there were now warships. Sleek, fast, unfamiliar in design, but unmistakably armed and moving with clear purpose. "That is not possible," Ryzek said, staring at the screen in disbelief. The scout reports confirmed no defenses, no fleet, nothing in orbit. "Clearly," Draeth said, his voice tight with controlled fury, "the scout reports were wrong." Across the Zoth fleet, similar scenes played out on every bridge. Officers who had spent the last 3 days relaxing in the confidence of an easy conquest now scrambled to bring weapons online, to raise shields that had been kept at low power to save energy during the long journey, to make sense of an enemy that had, moments before, seemed not to exist at all. The human fleet closed the distance quickly, using the confusion to its advantage. Smaller fighter squadrons, including Priya Nairs, streaked ahead of the larger capital ships, weaving between the still-forming Zoth defensive lines, firing quick, precise strikes against exposed engine ports and weapon turrets, before peeling away. "Contact! Contact!" Priya called out over her squadron's comm channel, as her Falcon 9 dove past a much larger Zoth cruiser, her weapons flashing bright as she struck one of its rear engines. The cruiser lurched, one of its 4 engines flaring out in a burst of sparks and losing power. "Engine hit confirmed. Moving to next target." "Copy, Falcon 9, came Diego's voice over the comm, "following your lead." Behind the fighters came the larger human warships, their long hulls sliding into position with practiced precision, weapons opening fire in coordinated volleys, designed by 30 years of careful planning. The Zoth fleet, caught in the middle of forming a defensive line, found itself struck from multiple sides at once, its neat, confident formation breaking apart into confusion. On the Vor Ashan car, Draeth gripped the edge of his console as reports of damage poured in from across the fleet. 3 cruisers reporting engine damage, Ryzek reported, his voice tense. 2 support ships destroyed. Shield strength across the fleet down to 60% and falling. "How is this possible?" Draeth demanded, more to the empty air than to any one officer. A species with no fleet, no orbital defenses. Where did these ships come from? No one had an answer. The truth, hidden for 30 years behind layers of secrecy and quiet sacrifice, was only now becoming clear to the Dominion's forces. Humanity had never been as weak as the scout reports suggested. It had simply been patient and careful, and willing to wait in silence for exactly this moment. "Bring the fleet into defensive formation," Dreyeth ordered, forcing his voice to remain steady despite the fury building inside him. "I want capital ships forming a wall between us and their attack lines. Concentrate fire on their largest vessels first. If they wish to fight, then we will show them what true war looks like." The Zoth fleet, though caught off guard, was still a force built from centuries of galactic conflict, and it did not break easily. Slowly, under Dreyeth's direction, the scattered ships began pulling together, forming defensive lines, bringing their considerable firepower to bear against the human attackers. What had begun as a one-sided surprise now shifted, slowly, into the beginning of a real and brutal battle. Aboard the human flagship, a massive vessel called the Horizon's Legacy, Sarah Chen watched the developing battle with sharp focus, coordinating fleet movements alongside Colonel Reyes and a room full of tactical officers. "They're recovering faster than expected," Colonel Reyes noted, watching as the Zoth formation began to stabilize. "Their command discipline is strong, even under surprise." "Then we press the advantage while we still have it," Sarah said. "Second wave, move in. Target their support vessels and troop carriers first. Cut off their ability to land forces on Earth, no matter what happens to their combat ships." Orders flowed out across the fleet, and a new wave of human warships surged forward, cutting through the edges of the Zoth formation, targeting the slower, less defended troop carriers that had been meant to bring invasion forces down to Earth's surface. One by one, carriers began to fall back or take damage, their mission to land ground troops becoming increasingly impossible under the weight of coordinated human fire. Dreyeth watched the losses mount on his display with a growing sense of disbelief. In 3 wars, across 11 conquered worlds, he had never faced an enemy that fought with this kind of coordinated precision from the very first moment of contact. This was not the disorganized defense of a young, frightened species. This was the work of a force that had trained, planned, and waited for exactly this battle. "Signal the rest of the invasion reserve," Dreyeth ordered grimly. "Tell them their presence is required immediately. It seems Earth has more teeth than we were told." Far behind the main fleet, a second wave of Zoth warships, held in reserve for emergencies, began powering their engines, preparing to join a battle that had, in the span of only a few minutes, transformed from an expected easy conquest into a fight for survival. The battle for Earth had truly begun. Back on the Endeavour, Priya Nair banked her Falcon 9 hard to avoid a burst of enemy fire, her heart pounding as the ship shook from a near miss. Through her cockpit glass, she could see the battle spreading out in every direction. Bright flashes of weapons fire, the slow tumble of a damaged ship venting atmosphere into the void, the streaking lines of fighters darting between much larger vessels. "Diego, you still with me?" she called over the comm. "Right behind you," Diego answered, his voice tight with concentration. "2 more engine runs, and that cruiser's not going anywhere." Priya pulled her ship into another tight turn, lining up a shot on a Zoth support vessel that had fallen behind the main formation. Her hands moved across the controls with the ease of long practice, years of simulations finally paying off in the chaos of real combat. She fired, watching her shots strike true against the ship's weakened shields, and pulled away before return fire could find her. "Splash 1 support ship," she reported, allowing herself a small breath of relief. Around her, dozens of other fighters fought similar small battles, chipping away at the edges of the Zoth fleet, while the larger capital ships exchanged heavier fire further back. It was chaotic, loud, and terrifying, but it was working. Slowly, ship by ship, the invasion fleet that had expected no resistance at all was being forced to fight for every inch of space it held. In the command center back on Earth's hidden shipyards, Sarah Chen watched the battle unfold across dozens of screens, each one showing a different part of the growing conflict. The first wave had gone better than she had dared to hope, but the fight was far from over. Dreyeth's reserve fleet was already moving to join the battle, and the true test of 30 years of preparation was only just beginning. "Keep pushing," she said quietly, watching the star map shift and change with every passing second. "We've shown them we exist. Now we show them we can win." Far above the quiet, unaware cities of Earth, hundreds of ships fought a battle that most of humanity would never know had happened. Unless, of course, humanity found a way to win it. The Zoth Reserve Fleet arrived within the hour, streaking into the battle from behind the main formation, adding nearly 200 fresh warships to a fight that had already grown fierce and bloody on both sides. High Marshal Drath watched the new arrivals join the fight from the bridge of the Vora Shankar, feeling a small measure of relief settle into his chest, for the first time since the human fleet had revealed itself. "Reserve Fleet has joined the engagement," Ryzek reported. "Enemy losses increasing across all sectors." "Good," Drath said. "Numbers will decide this, in the end. Whatever tricks they use to hide their fleet, they cannot hide from a fight of pure strength." But even as he said it, Drath felt a small doubt growing in the back of his mind. The human ships fought with a discipline and coordination that reminded him of the Dominion's own most experienced fleets, not the desperate, disorganized defense of a young species facing its first true war. Someone on the other side of this battle had planned for this moment carefully, and for a long time. Aboard the Horizon's Legacy, Sarah Chen received the news of the Zoth Reserve Fleet's arrival, with a tightening in her chest, though she kept her voice calm as she spoke to her officers. "Their numbers now roughly match ours," Colonel Reyes reported, watching the updated fleet counts scroll across her screen. "Maybe slightly in their favor, once the reserve fully integrates into their formation. Then it's time for the second part of the plan," Sarah said. Colonel Reyes nodded and turned to her console, sending a new set of orders across the fleet. For 30 years, Project Aegis had not only built ships and trained pilots, it had also developed tactics specifically designed for a moment like this, when raw numbers alone might not be enough to guarantee victory. "Bring the ion disruptor ships into position," Sarah ordered. "Target their command vessels first. If we can disrupt their communication and coordination, even for a few minutes, it will cost them far more than a few destroyed ships." Hidden among the larger human fleet were a dozen specialized vessels, built using some of the most advanced technology developed from decades of study on the alien metal recovered from Mars. These ships, called disruptors, carried powerful devices capable of sending out short, focused bursts of energy that could scramble enemy sensors and communications across a wide area, though the effect only lasted for a short time and required the ships to get dangerously close to their targets. "Disruptor Squadron moving into position," came the voice of their squadron leader, a steady veteran named Commander Okafor. "Estimate 90 seconds to firing range." "Copy that," Sarah said. "Fighter squadrons, clear a path for the disruptors. We need them close enough to hit as many Zoth command ships as possible in one coordinated strike." Across the battlefield, human fighters, including Priya Nair's squadron, shifted their focus, breaking away from smaller engagements to escort the disruptor ships through the thick of the fighting. It was dangerous work. Flying close escort meant taking hits, meant for slower, more valuable ships, but it was exactly the kind of role the pilots had trained for. "Falcon 9, form up with the escort wing," came the order over Priya's comm. "Copy, moving into position," Priya answered, pulling her fighter into a tight formation alongside a dozen others, all of them turning to shield the approaching disruptor ships from incoming fire. The escort run was brutal. Zoth fighters, quick to recognize the threat posed by the strange, slow-moving human ships at the center of the formation, threw themselves at the escort wing with reckless determination, trying to break through before the disruptors could reach firing range. Priya's Falcon 9 took 2 hits in quick succession, her shields flaring bright as they absorbed the damage, warning lights flashing across her console. "Shields at 40%, she reported through gritted teeth, pulling her ship into a tight roll to avoid a third hit. "Hang on, Priya," Diego's voice came through, tense but steady. Almost there. Ahead of them, the disruptor ships pushed forward under heavy escort, weathering hits from Zoth fighters and point defense weapons alike, their own shields straining under the pressure. Commander Okafor's voice came through the comm, calm despite the chaos around him. 30 seconds to firing range. All escorts, hold the line. The next 30 seconds felt like an eternity to everyone involved. Fighters twisted and turned through a storm of weapons fire, human pilots pushing their ships and their own nerves to the limit, buying precious seconds for the disruptors to reach their targets. One escort fighter, flying just ahead of Priya, took a direct hit and broke apart in a sudden flash of light, its pilot's voice cutting off mid-sentence over the comm. Priya felt a cold shock run through her, but forced herself to keep flying, keep fighting, knowing that stopping now would only mean more losses. Firing range reached, Okafor announced. Disruptors, fire. Across the center of the battlefield, the dozen disruptor ships released their built-up energy all at once, sending out a wide, overlapping wave of disruption that swept across a significant portion of the Soth fleet. On enemy ships throughout the area, screens flickered and died, communication systems fell silent, and sensor readings turned to useless static, all at the same critical moment. On the bridge of the Vor Ashan car, alarms blared as half the ship's systems went dark at once. "What is happening?" Draith demanded, gripping the edge of his console as his own screens filled with static. "Unknown attack, High Marshal." Ryzek shouted over the noise. "Communications down across at least a third of the fleet. Sensor data corrupted. We've lost contact with several of our command vessels." For several long, terrifying seconds, the Zoth fleet fell into confusion. Ships that had, moments before, been fighting in careful, coordinated formation now found themselves isolated, unable to communicate with their neighbors, unable to receive orders from their commanders, unable to properly track the enemy ships still firing on them from every direction. Human warships pressed the advantage immediately, capital ships surging forward to strike at the confused, disorganized Zoth formation, while the disruption effect held. Weapons fire tore into exposed hulls, engines, and weapon systems, inflicting damage far greater than would have been possible against a properly coordinated defense. "Get our systems back online," Draith roared, his composure finally cracking under the pressure of the moment. Now. It took nearly 2 full minutes for Zoth engineers to restore even partial function to the affected systems. 2 minutes during which the human fleet inflicted heavy losses across the confused enemy formation. By the time full communication and coordination returned to the Zoth fleet, dozens of their ships had been destroyed or crippled, and the careful numerical advantage the reserve fleet had brought was largely erased. "Disruption effect has ended," Colonel Reyes reported from the Human Command Center. "Their systems are coming back online. We won't get another window like that. Those ships need time to recharge before they can fire again." "Understood," Sarah said, studying the updated battle map. The disruption strike had cost the Zoth fleet dearly, but the enemy was still a powerful, determined force, and the battle was far from decided. "Pull the fighter squadrons back to regroup. Capital ships, maintain pressure but watch your formations. They'll be looking for any opening now that their coordination is restored." Across the battlefield, Priya guided her damaged Falcon 9 back toward the Endeavor for a brief chance to repair her shields, her hands finally beginning to shake now that the immediate danger had passed, at least for a moment. She had lost 3 pilots from her squadron in the fighting so far, friends she had trained alongside for years, and the weight of those losses pressed heavily on her even as she focused on flying her damaged ship safely home. "You did good out there," Diego's voice came through. Quieter now, more personal. "We all did." "It doesn't feel like enough," Priya admitted. "We lost people, Diego." "I know," he said, "but look at what's happening out there. We're winning, Priya. Not easily, not without cost, but we're winning." On the Vor Ashan car, Draith surveyed the damage reports with a growing sense of dread that he had not felt in centuries of service to the Dominion. His fleet still outnumbered the humans, if only slightly, but the losses from the disruption strike had been severe, and morale across the fleet had taken a heavy blow from the sudden, unexpected attack. "Status of the invasion timeline?" he asked Ryzek, his voice tight with controlled frustration. "Significantly delayed, High Marshal," Ryzek admitted. "At current losses, establishing full orbital control before attempting a ground landing will take considerably longer than originally planned, if it remains possible at all." Draith stared at the star map for a long moment, watching the shifting positions of both fleets as they regrouped and prepared for the next phase of what had already become the hardest battle he had commanded in his long career. "They were never as weak as the scouts believed," he said quietly, almost to himself. "This is not a young, frightened species defending its home for the first time. This is a force that has been waiting and preparing for exactly this moment. He turned to his officers, his voice hardening with grim resolve. Bring every remaining ship into a unified formation. If they wish to make us fight for this world, then we will fight, but we will fight with everything the Dominion has given us. Across the vast battlefield, both fleets pulled back briefly to regroup, gathering their strength for what everyone involved now understood would be the true, decisive phase of the battle for Earth. While the fleets regrouped, deep inside the hollowed-out asteroid called Haven Rock, Dr. Amara Singh worked without rest, coordinating repair crews and pushing the last reserve ships out of the shipyard and into the fight. For 30 years she had built ships in secret, never knowing exactly when they would be needed. Now that the moment had come, she found herself fighting a different kind of battle. One against time, against limited resources, against the simple physical limits of how quickly a ship could be repaired or completed. Dr. Singh called one of her senior engineers, a broad-shouldered man named Grigor Petrov, hurrying across the shipyard floor. The Guardian-class cruiser Resolve just came in from the fighting. Heavy damage to its shield generators. Crew says they took a direct hit from something we haven't seen before. Some kind of focused energy weapon that punched straight through their outer shielding. Amara followed him quickly to the damaged ship, now resting in one of Haven Rock's largest repair bays, its hull scorched and torn along one side. She ran a scanner over the damage, frowning as the readings came back. This isn't like anything from the samples we studied, she muttered, half to herself. They've got weapons more advanced than what we based our shields on. We need to reinforce shield frequencies across the fleet, now, before they use this weapon again. There's no time to refit the entire fleet mid-battle, Grigor said. No, Amara agreed, already moving toward a nearby console. But there's time to send an update to every ship's onboard systems. It won't fix the problem completely, but it should reduce the damage from that weapon type by a meaningful amount. Get me a channel to Fleet Command, now. Within minutes, Amara was speaking directly with Sarah Chen, relaying the discovery and the emergency shield adjustment her team had developed. Across the fleet, technicians and automated systems worked quickly to apply the update, buying whatever protection they could manage in the short time available, before the fighting resumed in full force. Good work, Doctor, Sarah said over the comm, her voice tight with the pressure of the ongoing battle. How many reserve ships can you get out to us? 20 more within the hour, Amara answered. Mostly smaller support vessels, but every ship counts right now. Send them, Sarah said. We'll take every advantage we can get. Back on the battlefield, the two fleets began drawing closer together again, both sides having used the brief pause to reorganize their formations and assess their losses. On the Vor Ashan Kar, Draeth studied the updated battle plan with narrowed eyes, aware that his fleet, though still formidable, had taken losses far greater than any campaign in recent memory. New formation is ready, High Marshal, Ryzek reported. Concentrated strike groups positioned to target their capital ships directly. If we can eliminate their largest vessels, their smaller ships will lose much of their coordinated firepower. Good, Draeth said. Execute the formation. And Ryzek, keep a channel open to the reserve fleet at Kaltoth Prime. If this battle continues to cost us at this rate, we may need to request further reinforcement, difficult as that would be to explain to the Dominion Council. Ryzek hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of admitting difficulty against what had been reported as a defenseless world, but he nodded and moved to carry out the order regardless. On the human side, Sarah Chen watched the Zoth fleet's new formation take shape with careful attention, quickly recognizing the shift in strategy. They're going to target our capital ships directly, she said. Concentrated strike groups, probably aiming to overwhelm our shields with focused fire, from multiple angles at once. We can't let them isolate the Horizon's Legacy, or any of the other command ships, Colonel Reyes said. If we lose central coordination, our advantage in tactics disappears fast. Then we adjust, Sarah said. Pull the fighter squadrons back, to form a protective screen, directly around our capital ships. Let the smaller vessels absorb some of that concentrated fire before it reaches our largest hulls, and bring the newly arrived reserve ships in to reinforce our flanks. We need every ship we can get in position before they close the distance. Orders went out across the fleet once more, ships shifting position, pilots like Priya Nair pulling their repaired fighters back into tighter formation around the larger capital ships, preparing for what everyone now understood would be an even harder fight than the one they had just survived. "Shields at 90%, Priya reported, checking her ship's systems one final time before the fleets closed the remaining distance between them. "Ready for round 2, I guess." "Stay close to the Legacy," Diego's voice came through, steady despite the tension in it. "If they're gunning for the capital ships, we need every fighter we've got protecting them." The two fleets, both battered but far from broken, began moving toward each other once more, the brief pause in fighting drawing to a close, as both sides prepared for what would become the fiercest and most decisive stretch of the battle for Earth. The renewed fighting broke out with terrible speed. Zoth strike groups surged forward exactly as Draeth had planned, concentrating their fire on the largest human ships in an attempt to break through the protective screen of fighters and smaller vessels surrounding them. The Horizon's Legacy shook violently as a coordinated volley struck its forward shields, alarms sounding across the bridge as Sarah Chen gripped the edge of her console to stay steady. "Shields down to 70% on the Legacy," an officer called out. "They're focusing everything on us." "Divert power from non-essential systems to forward shields," Sarah ordered. "Colonel Reyes, get our escort fighters tighter around the flagship. If they break through, we lose our ability to coordinate the entire fleet." Priya Nair's Falcon 9 twisted through a storm of enemy fire, weaving between larger human warships, as she and the rest of her squadron fought to intercept incoming fighters before they could reach the Legacy. Her weapons flared bright as she struck down one enemy fighter, then banked hard to avoid the wreckage, immediately lining up another shot. "They're not slowing down," she called out, breathing hard. "There's too many of them converging on the Legacy at once." "Focus fire pattern Beta," came Colonel Reyes's voice, calm and clear despite the chaos. "All fighter squadrons, tighten formation around the flagship's forward arc. Let the Legacy's own point defense systems handle stragglers. Your job is stopping the concentrated strike groups before they reach firing range." The fighters obeyed, pulling into a tighter defensive net, and slowly, through sheer coordinated effort, the tide around the Legacy began to hold. Enemy strike groups found themselves cut apart before they could deliver their full, concentrated fire, their careful formations broken apart by the same discipline and training the human fleet had spent 30 years perfecting. On the Vor Ashan Kar, Draeth watched the failure of his concentrated strike with a deepening frown. "Their coordination around the flagship is too strong," Ryzek reported. "We're taking heavy losses trying to break through, with minimal damage inflicted on their command vessel." Draeth said nothing for a long moment, watching the battle map shift and change, watching his fleet's numbers steadily shrink, while the human fleet, though battered, continued to hold its formation, with a discipline that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. "Pull back the strike groups," he finally said, his voice heavy with the weight of a decision he had never expected to make in this battle. "Reform into a defensive line. We will not break their flagship through direct assault. Not without losses, this fleet cannot sustain." It was, though Draeth did not yet say it aloud, the first order he had given in the entire battle that sounded less like a conqueror securing an easy victory, and more like a commander fighting simply to survive. Across the battlefield, both fleets pulled back once more, bruised and battered, each side now fully aware that whatever came next would decide the fate of the war for Earth, and, though no one on either side yet knew it, the fate of humanity's place among the stars. In the brief calm following the failed strike on the Legacy, both fleets drew back to gather their strength, but neither side truly rested. On the Vor Ashan Kar, High Marshal Draeth called his surviving senior officers together in a small briefing room just off the main bridge, the mood among them grim and uncertain, in a way none of them had experienced before in service to the Dominion. "Our losses now stand at just over 140 ships, Ryzek reported quietly. "The humans have lost fewer, though their numbers are also reduced. If this continues at the current rate, we may not have enough strength remaining to establish orbital control, let alone complete the invasion." Draeth stood silent for a long moment, staring at a star map showing the positions of both fleets, now separated by a wide stretch of open space, as each side regrouped. In 3 wars and 11 conquered worlds, he had never once considered the possibility of failure. Now, for the first time, that possibility sat heavily in the room with him. "There is still one option," said an officer near the back, a weapons specialist named Krill, the core disruptor. The room fell silent. The core disruptor was a weapon rarely used by the Dominion, powerful enough to tear apart the internal structure of enemy ships from a distance, but dangerous to deploy because of the massive amount of energy it required, energy that would leave the ship carrying it vulnerable and nearly defenseless for several minutes after firing. It has never been tested against an enemy of this coordination, Ryzek warned. If it fails to end the battle quickly, we will have exposed our own flagship for nothing. And if we do nothing, Draith said, his voice hard, we may lose this fleet entirely, and Earth along with it. I would rather take the risk than retreat and explain to the Dominion Council why an undefended world defeated us. He turned to Krill. Prepare the core disruptor. We will use it on their flagship the moment we identify a clear firing opportunity. Aboard the Horizon's Legacy, Sarah Chen received troubling news from her sensor officers. We're picking up unusual energy readings building on their flagship, said a young technician, studying his console with a furrowed brow. It doesn't match anything in our data from the earlier fighting. Whatever it is, it's drawing an enormous amount of power. Sarah exchanged a glance with Colonel Reyes. Get Dr. Singh on the line, she said. If they're building some kind of new weapon, I want her analysis immediately. Amara Singh's voice came through moments later, tired but alert despite the long hours she had already spent working without rest. I've seen readings like this before, in some of the older samples we recovered from Mars, she said. It's consistent with a weapon type we theorized about, but never built ourselves, something capable of destabilizing a ship's internal structure from a distance. If they fire that at the Legacy directly, our shields may not be enough to stop it. How long until it's ready to fire? Sarah asked. Based on the power buildup rate, Amara said, I'd estimate 10 to 15 minutes. Sarah turned to Colonel Reyes. We need to force their flagship to either fire early, before that weapon is fully charged, or prevent it from getting a clear shot at us altogether. Colonel Reyes studied the battle map for a long moment before speaking. If we send a strong strike force directly at their flagship, they'll either have to divert power to defend themselves, disrupting the weapon's charge, or risk firing early, with reduced effectiveness. It's aggressive, and it will cost us ships, but it may be the only way to neutralize that threat before it's ready. Sarah nodded slowly. Do it. Pull together our strongest capital ships and fighter escorts. We hit their flagship directly, hard and fast, before that weapon finishes charging. The strike force gathered quickly, a dozen of the human fleet's strongest remaining capital ships, forming up alongside 3 full fighter squadrons, including Priya Nair's, all moving toward the distant shape of the Vor Ashan car, with grim determination. This is it, Priya said quietly to herself, as she guided her Falcon 9 into formation, her hands steady, despite the fear sitting cold in her chest. Straight for their flagship. Copy that, Diego's voice came through, tense but resolute. Whatever they're building over there, we can't let it finish. The human strike force closed the distance rapidly, drawing heavy fire from Zoth escort ships positioned to protect the flagship. Explosions bloomed across the battlefield as both sides took losses, human capital ships pushing forward through a storm of defensive fire, fighters weaving between larger vessels to strike at exposed weapon systems and engine ports. On the Vor Ashan car, Draith watched the approaching strike force with narrowed eyes. They've identified the weapon buildup, Ryzek said grimly. They're attempting to disrupt our charge before it completes. Divert some defensive power to our shields, Draith ordered, but do not stop the disruptor's charge. We are close enough now. Continue building power. If they wish to throw everything at us, let them. It will not matter once that weapon fires. The Zoth flagship's shields flared bright under the concentrated assault, absorbing hit after hit as the human strike force pressed closer, determined to reach firing range before the mysterious weapon could complete its charge. Fighter after fighter fell on both sides, the space around the 2 flagships filling with wreckage and the bright flashes of ongoing combat. Shields at 50%, a Soth officer reported urgently. Hold, Draith commanded. Weapon charge at 90%. We are almost there. Aboard the Legacy, Sarah watched the numbers with rising tension. Weapon charge estimated at 90%, her sensor officer reported. We may not reach them in time. Then we changed the plan, Sarah said suddenly, an idea forming with the kind of clarity that only came under the greatest pressure. Colonel, Pull our strike force back, immediately. Pull back? Colonel Reyes asked, startled. Admiral, if we retreat now, that weapon will fire freely at us with nothing standing in its way. Exactly, Sarah said. If they believe we're retreating in fear, they'll fire the moment that weapon is ready, at maximum range, without waiting to close the distance further. That weapon requires enormous power, Dr. Singh said as much. If they fire it at long range, at reduced charge because we forced them to accelerate the timeline, the beam will be weaker, and more importantly, firing it will leave their flagship almost completely defenseless for several minutes afterward. We let them fire. Then we finish them. Colonel Reyes hesitated only a moment before nodding, understanding the shape of the plan. All strike force ships, disengage and pull back to Rally Point Delta. Full retreat formation. The human strike force broke off suddenly, pulling back from the Zoth flagship, in a move that looked, from the enemy's perspective, exactly like a retreat born of fear, at the sight of the powerful new weapon nearing completion. On the Vor Ashan car, Rizek watched the human ships pull away with something like relief. They're retreating, High Marshal. The weapon has done its work before even firing. Draeth allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, though something in the back of his mind still felt uneasy at how quickly and completely the human ships had broken off their aggressive strike. Do not let them regroup, he said. Fire the disruptor now, while they are still within effective range. End this, before they find another surprise to throw at us. Firing, Krill confirmed, and across the Vor Ashan car, immense amounts of stored energy surged into the ship's forward weapon array, building toward a single, massive discharge. The beam that erupted from the Zoth flagship was unlike anything the human fleet had faced before, a wide lance of shimmering, distorting energy that tore across the space between the two fleets and struck the rearmost human capital ship still within range, a vessel called the Steadfast. The ship's shields flared and failed almost instantly, and the beam tore into its hull, causing catastrophic damage along its length before the weapon's discharge finally faded. Steadfast is critically damaged, came the urgent report aboard the Legacy. Heavy casualties reported, but the ship remains intact. Barely. Sarah felt a pang of grief for the crew of the Steadfast, but she kept her focus fixed on the plan now unfolding exactly as she had hoped. Now, she said, all remaining strike force ships, full reverse. Target their flagship's weapon array and shield generators. They have almost nothing left to defend themselves with. Aboard the Vor Ashan car, alarms blared as the ship's systems strained under the massive power drain caused by firing the core disruptor. Shields at minimal power, Rizek reported, alarm clear in his voice. Weapon systems recharging. We have almost nothing available for defense. Draeth's eyes widened as he understood, a moment too late, the trap that had been set for him. They forced us to fire early, he said, a cold realization settling over him. They wanted this. Outside, the human strike force turned back with terrifying speed. Capital ships and fighters alike, converging on the nearly defenseless Goth flagship. Priya Nair's Falcon 9 led one of the fighter squadrons in a direct run at the ship's exposed weapon array, her weapons fire joining dozens of others in a concentrated assault against the temporarily crippled vessel. Direct hits across their weapon systems. Priya called out, weaving past a stream of weak, sporadic defensive fire. Their shields are barely holding. On the bridge of the Vor Ashan car, Draeth gripped his console as the ship shook violently under the weight of the human counterattack. Divert all remaining power to shields, he ordered. Get us out of firing range, now. But it was too late to escape entirely. The flagship's engines, already strained from the disruptor's massive power draw, struggled to respond quickly enough, and the ship took hit after hit along its hull and weapon systems as it slowly began to pull away from the worst of the assault. Their flagship is disengaging, Colonel Reyes reported. Weapon systems appear critically damaged. Engines functional but reduced. Sarah watched the damaged ex-Goth flagship limp away from the main battle, escorted by whatever remaining ships could still maneuver to protect it. It was not destroyed, but it was crippled, no longer capable of leading an effective assault, and its retreat sent a clear signal across the rest of the Zoth fleet. Signal all fleet commanders, Sarah said, allowing herself the smallest measure of relief. Their flagship is disabled. Press the advantage across every remaining engagement. This is our chance to end this. Across the scattered battlefield, word of the flagship's retreat spread quickly among the remaining Zoth forces, and the discipline that had held their fleet together, through the long, brutal fight, finally began to crack. Without clear leadership from their High Marshal, ship commanders across the fleet began making individual decisions, some continuing to fight, others pulling back to protect the wounded flagship, still others simply attempting to retreat from a battle that had, against all expectation, turned decisively against them. Human forces, still coordinated and disciplined under Sarah Chen's continued direction, pressed the advantage across every front, picking apart the increasingly disorganized Zoth formations one section at a time. Priya Nair, exhausted but still flying, found herself part of a final push against a cluster of Zoth cruisers attempting to cover the flagship's retreat. "This is it," she said over the comm, her voice tired but determined. "Let's finish this." "Right behind you," Diego answered, his own voice carrying the same mixture of exhaustion and resolve that had carried the entire fleet through the hardest battle of their lives. As the last organized resistance from the Zoth fleet began to crumble, word spread across the human fleet's communication channels, not of complete victory yet, but of a battle finally, undeniably, turning in humanity's favor. 30 years of secret preparation had been tested against one of the galaxy's experienced conquering powers, and against every expectation the enemy had carried into this system, humanity had not simply survived, it had fought back, and it was winning. Aboard the crippled Voroshan car, Draeth sat heavily in his command chair, watching the reports of scattered, uncoordinated resistance across what remained of his once proud invasion fleet. Ryzek stood beside him, his expression carefully neutral, though the tension in his posture betrayed how deeply the battle had shaken him. "Casualty reports, High Marshal," Ryzek said quietly. "We have lost just over half the invasion fleet. Many of the surviving ships report damage severe enough to prevent further effective combat. Several commanders have already begun independent withdrawal from the system." Draeth said nothing for a long moment, staring at the star map that had, only hours before, shown a fleet moving confidently toward an easy conquest. Now it showed scattered wreckage, retreating ships, and a human fleet that continued to press its advantage, with the same disciplined precision it had shown from the very first moment of contact. "In 3 wars, Draeth finally said, his voice quiet and heavy, "I never once considered that a species reported to have no defense at all could inflict this kind of damage on a Dominion invasion fleet." "The scout reports were accurate at the time they were made," Ryzek offered carefully. "It seems this species simply chose not to reveal its true strength until the moment it mattered most." Draeth considered this for a long moment. It was, he realized, a strategy the Dominion itself might have used against a lesser power: patience, secrecy, and a willingness to appear weak until the precise moment when strength could be revealed to greatest effect. It was almost admirable, in a cold, distant sort of way, even as it cost him one of the worst defeats of his long career. "Signal the surviving fleet," he said at last. "Full withdrawal from the system. We cannot continue this engagement with the forces remaining to us, and further losses will only weaken the Dominion's position for whatever response comes next." "And the report to the Dominion Council?" Ryzek asked carefully. Draeth's expression hardened. "The truth," he said, "that Earth is not the easy conquest we believed it to be. That whatever fleet they have built, in secret, over however many years, is a force to be reckoned with. The Council will not enjoy hearing it, but they will enjoy a false report, even less, when the consequences catch up to them." Aboard the Horizon's Legacy, Sarah Chen watched the scattered remains of the Zoth fleet begin a slow, disorganized retreat toward the edge of the system. Cheers rose briefly across several command channels as officers realized what was happening, though Sarah kept her own reaction more measured, aware of how much the victory had cost. "Confirmed retreat across all remaining Zoth formations," Colonel Reyes reported, a note of quiet relief in her voice despite her usual composed manner. "Their flagship is leading the withdrawal, moving toward the outer edge of the system at reduced speed." "Do we pursue?" asked a junior officer nearby. Sarah considered the question carefully before answering. 30 years of preparation had been built around defending Earth, not around chasing a wounded enemy across the stars into unknown territory. "No," she said finally. Let them go. We've protected what we set out to protect. Chasing a retreating fleet risks losses we don't need to take, and it risks provoking a larger response from whatever power stands behind them. Our mission was defense, and we have accomplished it. Colonel Reyes nodded, relaying the order to hold position rather than pursue. Across the battlefield, human ships slowly began to regroup, tending to their wounded, recovering escape pods from destroyed vessels, and assessing the true cost of the battle they had just fought, and, against every expectation from the invading force, won. Priya Nair guided her battered Falcon 9 back toward the Endeavour, her hands finally shaking now that the adrenaline of battle had begun to fade, replaced by a heavy, exhausted grief for the friends she had lost. Diego's fighter flew alongside hers, equally battered, both of them silent for a long stretch of the journey home. We won, Priya finally said, her voice quiet, almost disbelieving. We did, Diego agreed. Doesn't feel like much of a celebration though, does it? Priya thought of the pilots from her squadron, who would not be returning to the Endeavour, friends she had trained alongside for years, and found she could not disagree. No, she said softly. It doesn't. Behind them, the battlefield slowly grew quiet, wreckage drifting silently in the dark, the retreating Zoth fleet shrinking to distant points of light as it fled toward the edge of the solar system, carrying with it the shattered pride of a conqueror who had never once expected to lose. In the Aegis Command Center, Sarah Chen finally allowed herself to sit down, the weight of the last several hours settling into her bones all at once. Mateo Reyes sat down beside her, both of them staring quietly at the star map, now showing a battlefield slowly clearing of active combat, replaced instead by the slower, sadder work of recovery and repair. Final numbers? Sarah asked quietly. Mateo checked the report on his screen before answering. We lost 63 ships, just over 2,000 personnel, though rescue operations are still recovering survivors from escape pods and damaged vessels. The Zoth fleet lost close to 200 ships, by our best estimate, before their retreat. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, absorbing the cost of the victory. 2,000 lives was a number that would stay with her, she knew, for the rest of her own. But she also knew, with a clarity that steadied her, what the cost would have been if Project Aegis had never existed at all. If that lonely research station near Mars, 30 years ago, had been the only warning humanity ever received before an invasion fleet arrived, to find nothing standing in its way. They thought we had no defense, she said quietly, more to herself than to Mateo. Because for 30 years, that's exactly what we let them believe. And now they know the truth, Mateo said. Now they know the truth, Sarah agreed. The question is, what happens next? For us, and for whoever else is watching from out there, wondering what kind of world they just tried to take. Outside the command center's viewing window, the last light of battle faded from the dark expanse of space, leaving only the quiet aftermath of a war that most of humanity, going about its ordinary lives on the world below, would never even know had been fought, at least, not yet. 3 weeks after the battle, the scattered remains of the Zoth invasion fleet finally crossed back into Dominion territory, arriving at the massive shipyards orbiting Kaltoth Prime, in a formation far smaller and far more battered than the one that had departed months earlier. High Marshal Draith stood on the bridge of the Vorashan car as it limped into dock, its hull scarred and patched, its once proud weapon system still only partially repaired. He had spent the long journey home composing and recomposing the report he would have to deliver to the Dominion Council. Every version told the same difficult truth. Earth was not the easy conquest the scouts had promised. It was defended by a fleet built in secret, over decades, using technology advanced enough to fight the Dominion's own forces to a standstill, and, in the end, to force a humiliating retreat. The Council received his report with the cold silence Draith had expected. Some among them called for an immediate second invasion, a larger fleet, an overwhelming force to finish what had begun. Others, more cautious, argued that a species capable of building such a fleet in complete secrecy, without ever revealing its existence to Dominion scouts across 30 years of careful observation, was not a species to underestimate a second time. In the end, no immediate decision was made. The Council ordered a full study of the battle, of the strange, effective technology the humans had used, and of the possibility that other, larger threats in the galaxy, might take interest in a species that had just defeated a Dominion invasion fleet. For the time being, Earth was left alone, watched carefully from a distance, but not attacked again. Dreyeth, for his part, retired from active fleet command not long after his return, the weight of his first true defeat settling over him in a way that no honor earned in his earlier conquests could ease. In his final report to the Council, he included one line that would be remembered, quietly, by those who read it. We believed we understood the limits of every species we encountered. Earth has taught the Dominion that some limits are simply hidden, waiting for the moment they matter most. On Earth, life continued much as it always had for the vast majority of people, who remained entirely unaware that a battle for the fate of their world had been fought and won in the quiet dark beyond Jupiter's orbit. Project Aegis remained officially secret, its ships and shipyards hidden behind the same careful cover stories that had protected it for 30 years, though within its own ranks, the mood had changed permanently. Sarah Chen stood before a memorial wall deep inside Haven Rock, a quiet space built to honor those lost in the battle, their names etched carefully into smooth black stone, alongside a simple inscription: "They defended a world that never knew it needed defending." She had attended a dozen memorial services in the weeks since the battle, for pilots, engineers, and crew members whose families would never be told the true story of how they had died, only that they had served their country in a classified program and given their lives in its service. Priya Nair stood nearby, her flight suit replaced now by a simple dress uniform, her eyes lingering on the names of pilots she had trained alongside for years. Diego stood beside her, quiet and steady as always, though the exhaustion of the battle still showed faintly in his posture. "Do you think we'll ever be able to tell people the truth?" Priya asked quietly. "My parents still think I fly cargo drones." "Maybe someday," Sarah said, having overheard the question as she approached. "But not yet. The threat out there hasn't gone away just because we won one battle. If people knew the full truth right now, it might cause more panic than protection. For now, the secret keeps us safe, the same way it has for 30 years. Priya nodded slowly, though something in her expression suggested she still struggled with the idea of never being able to share the truth of what she had done, what she had lost, with the people she loved most. "For what it's worth," Sarah added, softer now, "what you did out there, what all of you did, it mattered more than almost anything else that's happened on this planet in the last 100 years, even if the history books never say so." In the months that followed, Project Aegis grew and changed in ways that would have been unthinkable before the battle. New funding, quietly approved by government leaders who had, for the first time, seen direct proof of the threat the program had been built to counter, allowed for the construction of even more advanced ships, based on new technology recovered from damaged Zoth vessels left behind in the retreat. Dr. Amara Singh led the effort to study this new technology, working alongside a growing team of engineers who finally had real combat data, rather than theoretical models, to guide their designs. The core disruptor weapon that had so nearly destroyed the Steadfast became the focus of intense research, eventually leading to new shielding technology, far more advanced than anything humanity had developed before. "We learned more from surviving that battle than from 30 years of quiet research," Amara said, during a briefing to the Aegis Oversight Council, months after the fighting had ended. "Every scrap of enemy technology we recovered, every tactic we saw them use, has given us insight that will make the fleet stronger, for whatever comes next." "And you believe something will come next?" asked one of the council members. Amara considered the question carefully before answering. "I believe," she said, "that a species capable of building an interstellar empire large enough to send an invasion fleet across the stars does not simply give up after a single defeat, especially not one caused by an enemy they underestimated. We have won time, not safety. We should use that time well." The council, having seen firsthand the cost of being unprepared 30 years earlier, agreed without hesitation. Construction of new shipyards began within months, hidden even more carefully than before, spread now not only across the solar system but toward the edges of human reach, preparing for a future in which Earth's quiet secret might, eventually, need to become humanity's open strength. A year after the battle, Sarah Chen stood once more before the assembled pilots and officers of the Seoul Defense Fleet, though the fleet before her now was larger, stronger, and better equipped than the one that had fought so desperately to defend Earth against an enemy who believed the planet defenseless. Priya Nair stood among the officers now, having been promoted to squadron leader in recognition of her actions during the battle, though the promotion came with the same quiet secrecy that governed everything else about the program. 1 year ago, Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd, an enemy fleet arrived at our solar system, confident that Earth had no defense at all. They were wrong, and it cost them dearly. But it also cost us dearly, and we would be foolish to believe that the story ends here. She paused, looking out over the rows of ships visible through the command center's wide viewing window, more numerous now than they had been even during the battle, growing stronger with each passing month. We do not know what comes next, she continued. We do not know if the Dominion will return with a larger fleet, or if word of our victory will draw the attention of other powers among the stars, curious about a species capable of defeating a Dominion invasion in complete secrecy. What we do know is this: we are no longer the world that stood defenseless 30 years ago, when a single research station near Mars was destroyed without warning. We are a world that has learned, prepared, and, when the moment came, fought back. Across the crowd, pilots and officers listened in silence, many of them carrying the same quiet weight of loss and hard-won victory that Sarah herself carried every day. But beneath that weight, something else had grown as well, a quiet, steady confidence that had not existed before the battle, born from the simple, powerful knowledge that when Earth's true strength had finally been tested, it had not been found wanting. Whatever comes next, Sarah said, her voice steady and sure, we will meet it the same way we met the enemy, who thought us weak, not with fear, and not with recklessness, but with patience, preparation, and the same quiet strength that has protected this world for 30 years, and will continue to protect it for however many years still lie ahead. Beyond the viewing window, hundreds of human warships floated in careful formation, hidden still from the wider galaxy, but stronger now, wiser now, and ready, should the day ever come again, to remind anyone who doubted them that Earth, though quiet, was never truly without defense. And far away, on a distant world, at the heart of an empire that had never before known defeat at the hands of a species it once judged too weak to matter, a single report sat filed away in the depths of the Dominion's records, carrying a warning that few among the stars would ever read, but that all of them, eventually, would come to understand. Some worlds are not what they seem, and some silences are simply strength, waiting patiently for its moment to be revealed. Not everyone connected to the battle carried only the weight of loss. On a quiet evening, a few months after the fighting had ended, Priya Nair sat across a small table from her parents, in their home in Mumbai, home for the first extended leave she had been granted since joining Aegis 5 years earlier. Her mother, a doctor with sharp eyes that missed very little, studied her daughter carefully over dinner. "You've changed," her mother said simply. "Something happened out there, on those cargo runs of yours." Priya hesitated, the old, practiced cover story sitting uneasily in her mouth for the first time in years. She could not tell them the truth, not yet, not for a long time still, if ever, but she found herself unwilling to brush the question aside entirely, the way she once might have. "It was a hard year," she said carefully, choosing words that were true, even if they were not complete. "I lost some people I cared about, good people. It's made me think differently about a lot of things." Her father reached across the table and took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "Whatever it is you can't tell us," he said gently. "We trust that you're doing something that matters. We always have." Priya felt her throat tighten, grateful for a kindness she had not expected to receive, and grateful too for the quiet strength of the secret that protected not only her parents' peace of mind, but the peace of an entire world that would never know how close it had come to losing everything on a single, quiet night above the orbit of Jupiter. "Thank you," she said softly, and for the first time since the battle, allowed herself to simply enjoy an evening with the people she loved, without the weight of the war pressing quite so heavily on her chest. Far above Earth, in the quiet dark of the outer solar system, construction continued steadily on the newest generation of Aegis warships, built using lessons learned from a battle that had nearly cost humanity everything. Dr. Amara Singh walked the length of a massive new shipyard alongside Grigor Petrov, both of them examining the skeletal frame of a warship far larger than anything the fleet had fielded during the battle against the Zoth invasion. "This one will carry double the shield capacity of the Legacy," Grigor said, running a hand along a support strut still being fitted into place by automated construction drones. "And the new weapon systems, based on what we recovered from their damaged core disruptor, should give us range and power comparable to anything the Dominion fielded." "It's a start," Amara said, though her voice carried the same quiet caution it always had. "But we can't assume this is the end of what we'll face. If the Dominion decides to return, or if some other power out there takes interest in what happened here, we need to be ready for more than just a rematch against the same enemy." "You think there's something bigger out there?" Grigor said. It was not quite a question. "I think," Amara said carefully, "that for 30 years, we assumed we were hiding from a single threat. Now we know there's an entire empire out there, one large enough to send fleets across the stars without a second thought about the cost. If they exist, it stands to reason there are others too. Other powers, other threats, watching a galaxy far larger and far more crowded than we ever imagined when we started this program." Grigor considered this in silence for a long moment as they continued walking past the growing framework of the new ship. "Then I suppose we keep building," he finally said. "We keep building," Amara agreed. "And we keep watching. That's the only way a world like ours survives in a galaxy like that one." Back on the Vorashan car, in the quiet months before his retirement, Draeth found himself thinking often of the battle above Earth, turning the memory over in his mind, the way an old soldier turns over a wound that never fully heals. He had commanded fleets across 3 wars, had claimed 11 worlds for the Dominion, and had believed, until that battle, that he understood the shape of every kind of enemy a fleet might face. Earth had taught him otherwise. It had shown him that strength could hide behind apparent weakness for decades, patient and silent, waiting for exactly the right moment to reveal itself. It was a lesson that unsettled him deeply, not because it made him fear humanity specifically, but because it made him wonder how many other worlds across the galaxy might be hiding similar secrets, waiting for their own moment to surprise an unsuspecting conqueror. In his final address to the officers who had served under him throughout the failed invasion, Draeth spoke plainly, without the practiced confidence that had once defined his command style. "We were wrong about Earth," he told them. "Not because our scouts failed in their duty, but because we assumed that what we could see was the whole truth. Whatever you do next, in whatever fleet you serve, remember this lesson well. The galaxy is full of quiet worlds that may not be as quiet as they seem." His officers listened in respectful silence, many of them carrying the same hard lesson with them into whatever commands awaited them next, a lesson that would, in small and quiet ways, shape how the Dominion approached every new world it encountered from that day forward. A year and a half after the battle, Sarah Chen sat alone one evening in her quarters, aboard the Horizon's Legacy, reviewing reports on the fleet's continued expansion, when a message arrived that gave her pause. It was a brief, cautious transmission, picked up by one of the deep space listening stations at the edge of the solar system, not from the Zoth Dominion, but from an entirely different, unfamiliar source, using a language and signal pattern that matched nothing in the Aegis database. She stared at the message for a long time, before calling Mateo Reyes to her quarters, showing him the transmission in silence. "Another one?" Mateo asked quietly, understanding immediately what the discovery meant. "Another one," Sarah confirmed. "Word of what happened here has clearly traveled further than we hoped. Whether this is a threat, a curious observer, or something else entirely, we don't yet know." Mateo studied the strange transmission for a long moment, before looking back at Sarah, his expression steady despite the uncertainty the message carried with it. "Then I suppose we do what we've always done," he said. "We prepare, quietly, and we wait to see what comes next." Sarah nodded slowly, looking out through the small viewport of her quarters, at the vast, star-filled dark beyond, a galaxy that had proven itself far larger, far more crowded, and far more dangerous than humanity had ever fully understood. But for the first time in 30 years, she faced that vast unknown not with the quiet fear of a species hoping simply to remain unnoticed, but with the steady, hard-won confidence of a species that had already proven, once, that it could stand and fight, when the moment truly mattered. "Let them come," she said softly, echoing words spoken by countless defenders of countless worlds before her, though none of them, perhaps, with quite so much quiet strength, standing silently behind them in the dark. "Whatever comes next, we'll be ready." And far beyond the edge of the solar system, hidden among the stars, hundreds of human warships continued their patient watch, ready, as they had been for 30 years, for whatever the vast and crowded galaxy might send their way next.